Hey everyone, and welcome to this introduction to your tasting pack. So I'm Phil from First Fill Whisky, and this is Colin. And tell me a bit about yourself, Colin.
Yeah.
How are you intertwined with this?
Sure. Kia ora, I'm Colin, Colin Mairs. If you've not guessed the accent yet, I'm originally from Scotland, and I worked as a tour guide up until the pandemic hit, and then decided to find something else to do, you know, a bit of a change. Ended up with meeting Mark and Ro from Waiheke Whisky and got on board as their, I guess you'd call me their sales rep. I'll just call myself worker, so
Yeah.
bit of everything.
Yeah.
So I'm proud to be representing Waiheke and launching our whiskies to the world.
Yeah, it's really cool. So you guys would have got a tasting pack, and there would be, and on your tasting pack you're going to have this sheet which is kind of a guide to the whiskies you're going to be tasting. And there's going to be 4 whiskies there. Just tell us a little bit about, you know, what we're doing today. Sure. And, you know, what are we going to be trying?
Yeah, so the idea basically is at home, you can watch along with this video, you can taste while we taste. If we go too fast, you don't have to pour a whole glass, but just have a taste, get a bit of an idea for it. You might be sharing it with other people as well, do it however you like, or you can refer back to the tasting mat as well. And yeah, basically this gives you a bit of an overview of each of the 4 spirits that we're going to taste. One's a spirit, 3 are whiskies. And so we're going to go in the order of Peated New Make, and then down to Moss, and then up here to Seris 1, and finish with Bog Monster.
Cool. So like just before we jump into the details, so Waiheke Whisky just in general, what do you think kind of the core, like what is it about? What's the distillery about, do you think?
So it's obviously a New Zealand distillery, and Waiheke, for those who are not familiar, it's an island situated just off the coast from Auckland, a 40-minute ferry ride. The distillery started back in 2010, so it makes it actually one of the oldest active distilleries in New Zealand. But we're in 2022 now, and we're just about to start selling it to the public.
So haven't sold anything.
Yeah, so it's been kind of it's a passion project by Mark Izzard, one of the co-founders and owners, who kind of just sort of started making whiskey as a hobby, every young boy's dream maybe, and then realised it could be a possible business. Mark and Ro opened the Heki over on the island end last year, into 2021, so that's going to be the brand home for Waiheke Whisky and also for Heki Lager, their business partners. So so basically we're just waiting for the whiskey to be ready, and now we think it's ready, and we've got different expressions and going to be releasing them. So this is our first release pack.
And so like on this pack as well, we've got New Zealand Peat, right? So this is a New Zealand Peat pack. So tell us a little bit about the New Zealand Peat. Like, what is this going to be different, or what is this stuff
so New Zealand Peat is pretty different to Scottish peat or peat from other countries. The peat that we use mostly comes from Tussock Creek, so that's down in Southland, far south of the South Island. The makeup of the peat is a bit different. I think you did a quite in-depth video on peat.
Yeah, I've got a video on peat if you want to go watch it.
So as you know, it's quite a different makeup. We've got of course New Zealand plants that are in there decomposed. So the flax and rushes and different things.
It's a whole sort of different ecosystem. Yeah, and I think for those people who don't really even know what peat is, it's basically kind of soil that's kind of decomposed, sort of, you know, it's on its way to become coal, and it hasn't become coal yet. So it's a very dense kind of thing. And what distilleries do is they actually burn this peat, and the smoke goes up and gets absorbed by the barley, and then that smoke flavour carries through the whole process. And I guess this being something from a completely different part of the world than Islay in Scotland, where normally you might expect peated whiskey from, it's going to have a completely different profile.
So what we're kind of saying is that it's peat, but not as you know it. So it's got a different profile to its Northern Hemisphere cousin. And this is New World Whisky, this is New World Peat, and we want to show what a New Zealand whisky can be, and to be a New Zealand whisky with a New Zealand identity. And so a big important part of that is using New Zealand peat.
So one of the big things about them is the peat, but also we've got these funky kind of things behind us over here. So tell us about this. We've got a couple of stills.
I'll give you one.
Oh yeah, cool. Here we go. This is great.
So these are models of the new stills. Our first 2 stills for Waiheke Whisky were built on the island. They sort of look like more like this one that I'm holding. So that they're Vitriol 1 and 2, the original stills. That's what all the spirits we're tasting today were all distilled in those originals. But to take it to the next level, we've got these on contract. We purchased these from Speyside Copper Works. So these have been built, proper 7 metre tall versions of these have been built, and they're on their way here as we speak. Might be here by the time you're watching this, but due to arrive in July 2022, and these are going to go into the new distillery. So basically we're moving into phase 2, building the new distillery, and these stills
it's fascinating. And this geometric design, I've never seen that in like a distillery before. And that adds like a more that copper contact, right?
So basically flat panels all joined together, sort of individual little triangles, and so it just allows for more reflux of the spirit, more copper contact, to give a purer spirit. This is the wash still, so that's where the beer is firstly goes into there. The beer is boiled off to become spirit, and so this is a more onion shape, so kind of more traditional that you'll find in some other Scottish distilleries. And then once it's come off the wash still, it goes into the spirit still, so that's this one, and then it's distilled again, so basically this is double distillation. And then it's coming off clear, and it comes off the spirit, off the still.
That's cool. I really like that. So cool. Let's jump into these whiskies then.
So we'll start with the new make. So that's your clear spirit. So this is our peated new make. So we've done both peated and unpeated new make. So again, the difference being that the peated, the barley's just been dried using peat, so that decomposed plant material has been chucked on the fire, and that imparts that smoky smell, that peaty smell into the grain. So our non-peated, of course, isn't using any of that. That's just using air drying. And so this is just a taste or just a glimpse of what Waiheke Whisky is in its youth. So it's not yet whiskey.
Not yet legally whiskey in New Zealand. Has to be 2 years old. Because a big part of whiskey as well is how it's aged in wood. But so this you're just getting the spirit character of the still, and you're not getting that wood contact. So it's a bit more of a pure kind of like essence of what is coming out of the distillery. So it's something we've put in the tasting packs just as a little treat for people that want to see what the new make spirit is like. We're not planning on selling this in bottles outside of tasting packs, so it's just to give you a glimpse. It's probably something that not a lot of people would really drink of an evening. I don't know many people that sit and sip new make spirit regularly, but it's nice just to have a look at and just to see what the DNA and real character of our spirit is. It's like a curiosity dram. So in front of us here on your packs, you'll see a bunch of information, and some of it can be quite complicated, and some of it you might already know about. So depending on how much whiskey you've drunk and how much you know. So at the top of here, so we've got peated new make. It says peated single malt spirit. So single being a single distillery, which is Waiheke Whisky, and malt, so it's from barley, and this is the spirit. So we're just talking about the spirit, so we can't actually call this a whiskey. So what do we got up here though? At the top of it, top right, you got
So in each one, it's got the years. So basically, when it was distilled and bottled. So because this is new make spirit, it was distilled this year, bottled this year. You'll see the years, and the other ones are different. And then we run through just a bit more detail about things like the yeast, the wort, the wash ABV. So you might notice that the yeasts are on the aged whiskies, they're all the same, so it's Saccharomyces. That was because at that time, when we started distilling back then, we didn't have distiller's yeast available to us, but now we do, and so that's why the stuff that we've distilled this year is using distiller's yeast.
So slightly different.
So So then it's got the other detail is things like the wash ABV. So that's the wash is when it's a beer. So basically, the first step to making whiskey is make a strong beer. So it's telling you the alcohol percentage on the wash on each of these. How long the fermentation is, so that's just when the yeast is turning the sugars into alcohol. So 3.5 days, 3.5 days on this one. Spirit on and off, that's just when we're taking the cut, so when it's coming off of the stills, we're taking the cut, which is the part that we're going to put into barrel.
So you don't actually take everything, so when things go through a still, you don't actually take everything. There's like you basically start running it, and then you go, okay, start taking it from here.
Yeah.
It keeps going, and then you're like, okay, stop there, and you get a certain flavour profile based on where that cut is.
Yeah, right? So we're just taking the heart of the run. So we're taking off the head, taking off the tail. They'll go back in again to be distilled with the next distillation.
Yeah.
But we're just taking that heart, and so those are the alcohol percentages that it's at when we're taking the cup.
Yeah.
And then the rest is just all about the colour, nose, palate, finish.
Yeah, so the below information is probably the more information that's a little bit more straightforward for you, those of you who don't drink a lot of whiskey. Yeah, we've got the colour, clear, some tasting notes, normally what you can get off the palate, which basically means your taste, and the nose, which is what you can smell. And yeah, this one heavily peated malt, and ABV 45% alcohol. Cool. So let's.
So you want to get your nose in it first. So usually looking at a whiskey, and when I say looking, I mean tasting, but you're going to look first. And so looking at the colour, again, of course, in this one, I said a whiskey, but it's not a whiskey. So it's clear. That's just because it's not had any contact with wood.
So it hasn't been in one of these
at
all. It's completely clear, like a gin or a vodka.
And then nosing it, glassware is quite important. Did you want to touch on that, Phil?
Yeah, so what we're using here is the Glencairn glasses, and it's basically this tulip style, and I do really recommend a tulip style glass. There's heaps of different glasses around. I mean, you could use like a wine tasting glass. That also works really well. There's nothing wrong with that. These ones are the most famous ones that you often see distilleries have, and you'll see around in whiskey clubs and that sort of thing. And what's good about them is it has this bulb shape, so it lets the whiskey breathe, but then it narrows at the top, and it kind of concentrates those aromas. So I guess what you're doing with a glass like this is you're adding the smell to the experience. Where with more kind of a tumbler type of glass, it's great for drinking, but it's a lot harder to get your nose in and smell, but it's great for adding ice cubes too. So this, not only are you sipping it and tasting it, you can also smell it.
Yeah. And I think it's important really to distinguish between whiskey tasting or spirit tasting and spirit drinking. So when you drink to enjoy. So drink it the way you like it. Add ice, add water, add Coca-Cola. Hell, it's yours. Do what you want with it. But when you're tasting, you really want to get the most out of tasting. So a glass like this will help you get more out of it. And so, yeah,
definitely. There's no wrong way to drink whiskey. It's just depends on what you want to get out of. Yeah, if you're just sitting around drinking, you want it on ice, do it. If you want to dive deep and appreciate it and work out all those subtle flavors, these glasses are going to really help you with that.
So getting the nose in there, you want to just get your nose in. If you're not used to nosing 45% alcohol, then go in gently, but you might get a little bit of nose hair prickle first, but then that should die down. One
tactic I've heard is that you can put your nose in, and when it's too hot, just slowly pull away until it gets to a point where it's not, it's not burning kind of your nostril. So you just go in and pull back to where it's kind of suitable for you.
Yeah, and then don't worry if you're looking at the tasting mat and reading these things and thinking, I don't get that. It's not an exact science. So some of these notes you might get them, you might get something completely different, and that's fine. But I certainly get, I think, a lot of cereal on this new make spirit. We do have quite a cereally character for our spirit. There's some fruit as well, which I think are kind of dried fruits, like maybe currants, kind of raisins, blueberries. Definitely. I think we've got on the sheet as well.
I get a lot of salty kind of notes as well. And that, I don't know if it being on a little island surrounded by water plays a part in that, but there's definitely a lot of salty kind of seawater thing.
Yeah, there is a salinity character to it. That's, I guess, a bit of the mystique of distilling is where some of the flavors and things come from, and saltiness. Generally, people kind of say that it's because it's by the sea, and so this hasn't aged in a barrel, so it's not sat there breathing in and out the air. But it has been distilled in a place that has a lot of sea spray. So
it's interesting.
So it does get some sort of seawater. I think the other thing actually that probably gives us that salinity and that seawater is that the water that we use, it's all rainwater, so it's just off the roof. Waiheke notoriously has a bit of often a water shortage, and so a lot of people have tanks that they collect the rainwater. So this is rainwater.
Fascinating. Basically, you can kind of nose it, see what you're getting then, and then you can sip it as well and see if you're getting kind of different flavors as well. So we'll take a sip. It's a real fascinating look into what Waiheke Whisky is, and straight away you do get some of that smokiness, but it is a different type of smokiness than I've had before with other whiskies. So it is a really interesting kind of snapshot of what New Zealand whiskey and character kind of can be.
The other point that we have on the tasting mats, you've got nose, palate, and then finish. And so the finish is, if you've not experienced that before or what that means, that's just basically what you feel after you've swallowed or spat it out. And so it's just that whatever lingers, is it long, does it stay around, do the flavours change? So in this one we've said it's slow burning, heartwarming peat. And so you really get, I think, the punch of peat on the finish. Just that kind of, burny.
Yeah, it's kind of like that sort of aftertaste kind of thing. You know, like, can you still sort of slightly taste it in your mouth after you've had a sip? And definitely, I mean, actually with most of these whiskies really, there is kind of, and I think generally smoky whiskey in general has that slightly longer finish where, you can still, it's still there. Like, it's not fading away too quickly like a lot of really lighter whiskies might have, or unpeated whiskies. Great. So should we move on to Moss?
Next one, Moss.
Cool.
So Moss, next one down below the peated new make. Again, the tasting notes there, and if you want to read all the more geeky things, again, it's Saccharomyces, which we've used in this one and the next two. Again, 3.5 day ferment. So again, looking at a whiskey, assessing a whiskey, you look at the colour and you can say something interesting about the colour, but it doesn't really matter, really, the colour, and that's because we don't, but some people do, use caramel colouring. So these are all natural colour.
It's all natural colour. Because the first one whiskey you've just had was clear, right? It looked like vodka or gin. I mean, we can't call it whiskey though, technically. Whereas this, you can see it's a slightly different colour, and that's what you get when you age whiskey in a cask, like this one here. Those wood kind of elements are going to be imparted onto the whiskey, and will impart also that colour onto the whiskey.
So as it's in the cask or in the barrel, the barrel's breathing, and so we talk about the angel share. If you've not heard of that before, that's basically the part or the percentage of the spirit that escapes. And so as the cask is sitting in the warehouse, it's breathing, it's taking in and taking out air, and when that air escapes, some evaporation happens. And so in parts of Scotland, where I'm from, generally they say the angel share is about 2 to 3% a year, whereas in Waiheke it can get up into the teens, maybe 15% some points in summer, just because of the different climates. And
for those of you who don't know, like, I mean, I'm from Auckland myself, so like this distillery is like very close. You know, it's just the island. You hop on a little ferry ride and you go there, and Auckland's hot. You know, I lived in London for a little while, and it's a lot more humid here. Like in the summer times, at night time. I mean, a lot of Australians probably watching this will go, it's not that hot. But, but if you're from the UK, you'll probably think
if you're Scottish, it's hot.
Depends on where you start, where your reference point is. And so I guess a big part of this one is, because we're going to talk about a different cask later on, but this is from an ex-bourbon cask or American oak cask?
It's two types of cask in this one. So we've got an American oak STR, so on the tasting mat it says STR. That means shaved, toasted, and recharred. So basically, it was a wine cask. We shaved the inside, we toasted it again, recharred it, and then put the spirit back into it. So it's kind of making it a fresh cask in some ways, kind of like a virgin oak, but it has contained wine previously. And then the other type of cask that we've used is ex-bourbon. So they've contained bourbon in the US, and then they've been shipped over here, and we filled them with the spirit. So this one's called Moss, and of course a very kind of flavour-led name. Of course the name suggests it's going to be mossy. I think you do get like a kind of Irish moss characteristic on it. I was pouring this at a tasting we did a wee while ago, and this guy was just kind of a bit confused by the name. He said, but where do you get the moss from? How do you get the moss in it? And I didn't know what he was referring to, but he was referring to, I think, is that Irish moss, some like things that you get at the pharmacy or something. I don't know if that's a New Zealand thing.
It's like a little green bottle kind of thing. It's called Irish moss.
He's like,
I think you take, like, if you get a bad cough or something, you like take a teaspoon of it. Because
he was like to me, how do you get the Irish moss taste though? It really tastes like Irish moss. And I hadn't grown up with Irish moss. I didn't know what it was, so I've actually still to go and get some. I should go and get some to try it, but But yeah, I get like a bit of licorice as well.
Yeah, I definitely get, when you sort of think about that moss, that kind of like that herby earthiness kind of part as well, but along with some of those floral notes as well. So you get a lot of those kind of like, yeah, those things you'd find kind of in the ground already.
Yeah. So I think, again, we're getting some of the distillery character with that earthiness and that kind of cereal character, but now the cask is having more influence. So of course, the longer you leave it in a cask, the more influence it's going to get. The fact that we've got a different climate here means that that's happening faster and having more effect. So this one's been in the cask for 5 years. It was distilled 2017, bottled 2022.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You're kind of getting a lot of the notes from the new make, but you're adding on these kind of woody kind of notes and stuff from that cask. So,
what do you think of the finish? Did you get?
Oh yes,
still lingers.
Yeah, definitely. It's good. Let me take one more sip.
Yeah. It's quite. I get a little bit of spice. I don't know if we've got spice on there, have we? Yeah, we have got spice. Good.
Yeah.
So it's quite long bit of spice.
Yeah.
Definitely the sweet fruit, like again dried fruits, I think.
Yeah.
And that hint of smoke. So it's not. This one is lightly peated, so it's certainly not like a real big punch of smoke. It's not.
No.
It's not knock you over sort of smoke, but just a nice hint of smoke. In that.
Yeah, it's just but it's kind of dancing with those other flavors. It's not the most dominant flavor, but also gives it that kind of nice finish that just sits there on your palate. Yeah. Cool. Great.
So we'll move on
Next
to
one.
Seris 1. So you might be looking at the tasting mat and thinking, is that a misprint? Is that supposed to be Seris? But it's Seris. And so this whiskey had a few different names over its kind of infancy. We originally called it Sweet Peat, and then we called it Sherry Peat, and then we just thought those were all just a bit too boring, or someone else had already called their whiskey something like that. So then Mark came across the name Seris. It's actually the Arabic name for sherry, or for Jerez, where sherry comes from. So the Jerez region of Spain. So sherry in English, or Jerez in Spanish, and then both those words originate from the Arabic Seris. So we've gone right back to the source. Yeah.
And so I guess the big kind of difference, if I was to kind of think, the difference between this and the moss is going to be the cask, right? Yeah. So you're getting a different cask with this one. Yeah. So what's the cask with?
Yeah. So it's still lightly peated malt, so same peating specifications as the moss, but in this one we've used the American oak STR, so the shaved toasted recharred, but then also the Apera, and if you've not heard of that before, that's Australian sherry. So they used to call it sherry in Australia, but then because you shouldn't call a product sherry if it's not from Jerez in Spain, so instead the Australians now call it Apera, and we have put the grape type because this is a Pedro Jimenez, so we can still call it Pedro Jimenez because that's still the grape type. Yeah. And so that's a sweet type of
very
type
sweet,
of
very sweet type of grape type, and I think it's I assume the Australians dry the grapes in a similar way. I assume. Yeah. I assume it's the exact same process. I think as they do in
very sweet in Spain in Jerez, but. Yeah.
So I guess as you're going into this, you're thinking, like, is the sweeter are you getting? And like, so when you think sherry, right? So you think, like when I think if I've had sherry, there's a lot of types of sherries, but generally the most common ones you see that are used with whiskey are Oloroso and PX. And both of those are getting those dried fruits, those nuttiness flavors and those spice flavors. So those kind of the things that might be different between this and maybe the moss. So going into it. So let's jump in.
Yeah. So on the nose, I think you get a bit more of that influence of the sherry. So those are things like the spiced apple, sandalwood, which I think is a really nice note. It's got some citrusy notes as well. Yeah,
and definitely get a lot of that. It's not sort of hard and fast rules, but there's definitely those fruity notes coming through. And I think orange citrusy is definitely one I'm getting.
It's got a beautiful oranginess, yeah.
And
orange
some
caramel.
Raisins as well.
And generally when you're tasting the whiskey as well, you want to kind of hold it in your mouth for a little bit. Like, I hope you've not been doing this so far, but we're not just shotting them back.
Yeah. We're not doing shots.
Let it touch the sides. Just get it around your mouth a little bit, and then it kind of gets into a bit more different. What's the word I'm looking for? Taste buds.
Yeah. Yeah, just using your whole mouth to really kind of bring the most out of the whiskey.
So yeah, a lot of those characteristics then are coming from the cask type. So again, comparing back to the moss, I mean, let's actually do that. So comparing back to the moss, it's definitely got more oranginess, I think, on the Seris, and on the palate, it's got like a bit more creaminess as well, I would say, on the Seris. So it's like creamy butterscotch, kind of clotted cream maybe.
Yeah, definitely.
Again,
yeah,
make up your own tasting notes.
Yeah, and the moss for me, definitely more of that biscuitiness. And saying that, they're definitely getting the same overall kind of profile from the distillery.
Yeah.
So a lot of it's going to be just crossing over. You're going to be a lot of the same notes at the same time. And some of you might be struggling to actually taste some of the difference, depending on how much whiskey you've had. But yeah, this is from the same sort of family. It's come from the same stills. So you're getting the same like peatiness. I'm also getting some of even that kind of like spice and stuff from the Seris as well.
Yeah. And I think on the finish, it's got, again, the dried fruit, the spice comes through in the end as well. We've said on the tasting notes that it's Moorish, so that means just makes you want to go back for more. Maybe we should have put Moorish as a hint back to the Arabic Seris true. Thing there.
yeah. And the other thing is about this as well that makes it probably quite much easier to kind of like go down than the others is that this one's bottled at 42%.
Yeah, so we kind of played around with the ABVs and these different spirits. We just kind of found that this one just sat best at 42. We also wanted to make it a bit more accessible because it's sherried. It is quite it's sherry but peat, so it's sweet but smoky. And if we went too high in the ABV, that might scare some people off. So we want to bring people along gently. Yeah. We will have some higher ones, like the next one actually. Higher spirit, higher ABV releases coming. So yes, these are just kind of the gateway to get you in. Yeah.
I do find with this as well, and I guess a lot of what I'm getting from this distillery is the finish is still long. I'm getting a lot, it sits there. Yeah, that little bit of sweetness, but same that little bit of kind of that smoke, but that different type of smoke, that kind of earthy smoke.
Yeah, and it just kind of lingers there. They got like this, like a distant bonfire sort of, just sitting around. Yeah. Cool. So
great.
Last dram is
I'm grabbing the wrong one.
Bog Monster.
Onto the Monster.
Yeah.
The Monster. All right, this is the final boss.
So one thing actually I should also mention is that you might have noticed some of the numbers, and you might be thinking they don't know how to count these people in Waiheke. So Peated New Make doesn't have a number below it. Moss has 1, Seris 1 has 2, and then Bog Monster is 5. And that's because these are the release numbers. So when we start to release in full-size bottles, that's coming soon. Our first 2 releases are going to be Moss and Seris 1. And so Moss is going to be release number 1, Seris 1 is going to be release number 2. And then we'll have a couple of releases in between Bog Monster, so you're just getting a bit of a sneak peek of Bog Monster with this tasting pack. With the tasting packs as well, we're going to do 3 tasting packs of our core range really. So this is number 1, NZ Peat. Number 2 is going to be Dog Years, and in number 2 there'll be 4 non-peated expressions. So that's for the people that maybe aren't so keen on peat. And then tasting pack number 3 will be our special circumstances. So Bog Monster is actually one of the special circumstances. So these are a bit more special, bit more smaller quantities. This one's actually a single cask. And so this is a single cask distilled in 2015. So it's amongst our oldest stuff going into bottle as well. This is 7 years old.
So this is kind of like everything. This is kind of everything turned up, right? This is what I kind of find on Bog Monster. It's 46%.
Yep.
It's a bit older. It's had more cask influence, and it's also more smoky. Yeah. Because it's got a higher ppm, which is like how much barley smoke gets infused with early on in the process. Yeah.
So ppms, you might hear whiskey geeks use that term. That's phenolic parts per million. So basically, when they're measuring how much peat is being used when the smoking of the barley. Yeah. And those previous ones are about 30 ppm, 30. Yeah. And then this one is at about 40, if that number means anything to you. Basically it's turned up a gear. Yeah. So it's kind of why it's the Monster. It's the kind of the leveled up
kind of dram, a bit more punchy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the monster from the bog. So this one has got a slightly different colour perhaps to the others you can compare. I think we call this one deep copper in the colour. In the nose I get the lemon, camphor, again still the toasted oats, that cereal character still comes through, and a sweet bacon. I think that's just a nice kind of unexpected note, like it's got a little bit of this savoury kind of character to it. Yeah,
it's definitely got some of that those bacony, almost like a glazed bacon. There's something like definitely a bit more kind of punched up about it. I'm still getting a lot of those similar notes. It's still that kind of same New Zealand peat smoke and that sort of thing. And a lot of those cereal notes as well going on.
On the palate in this one, so it's 46% ABV, so a bit higher than the previous ones. I think it's got a really good texture, so we can talk about the mouthfeel or texture of a whiskey. So just how does it feel in your mouth? Does it kind of feel thin, or does it feel creamy or oily? And so I think you get a lot more oiliness on this one. It's got, I think, still that sweet bacon character, still earthiness, salinity. And I think this is just this is the monster.
It is the monster. Yeah. I really like this one. It's just everything turned up.
Yeah,
I just love that sort of glazed bacon. That's the one I keep coming back to. It just it's really nice on top of all those other notes we've already had. Salted caramel is definitely one I'm getting too. Yeah,
and I think peat's not everyone's cup of tea or everyone's glass of whiskey, but I think for those that like peat, this is a real good. This is the one really to show what New Zealand peat can be, and this is New Zealand's peat potential right here.
And that's one of the things as well. I mean, with there are other New Zealand distilleries, but there's not too many that are doing actually peated whiskey and using peat. So this really shows it off. But as you said, peat is a divisive flavour note. It's a bit like wasabi or chili. You know, some people like it, some people won't like it. But if people like it, they're going to
we've got a bit of an obsession with peat at Waiheke, and that's why we've kind of quite boldly gone for the first tasting pack. The first product that we sell is peat. It's all peated spirits, and that's because we want to show we want to make New Zealand peated whiskey. So this is kind of what we're about. The next one is going to be non-peated, but just to show we can also do that, and we don't want to leave anyone out. So we're doing non-peated as well. But this is really where the heart of Waiheke Whisky is with New Zealand peated whiskies. Yeah, definitely. And again with this, really, I'm getting a longer finish than any of them so far. It's like, I mean, I haven't even sipped again. I'm still getting the flavour coming through and the smoke coming through. And I think that's a combination really of probably the higher ppm plus a bit longer in the cask. Again, with our climate being different here to other whiskey making countries, it can be a bit of a fine balancing act not to leave it in the cask too long. Like some people might think 7 years, that doesn't sound like a long time for a whiskey, but really in New Zealand that is significant time for a whiskey. And so just that extra time in cask, I think, gives that extra bit on the finish.
Yeah, so one thing with this Bog Monster as well, because it is kind of more a punched up whiskey, we actually have this little kind of jug of water at the front. So one thing you can kind of do when you're drinking whiskey is add a little bit of water. And water's interesting because if you add lots of water, you can kind of dilute it. Like say if you're struggling to drink it and it's a bit hot, you can add a lot of water and it kind of can mellow it down a bit. But if you add just a few drops of water, sometimes it can actually open a whiskey more up, a bit like airing a wine. I mean, maybe let's try a few drops in the glass as well.
Yeah, so different ways you can do it. If you've got a pipette, you can use a pipette. We're using a straw, so basically you're just dipping the straw in, getting a little bit of water. Shall I add yours, Phil?
Yeah.
This one. And so literally just a couple of drops.
Just like hardly anything.
And especially depending on how much you've got in the glass, you don't want to overwater it. So remember, you can always add more water. You can't take water out. Yeah. So just go gently, and then you'll notice that it does sort of break the spirit a little bit. So you kind of start to see some swirls. Yeah.
You'll see kind of this oily kind of sort of thing going on in the glass. Yeah. And it's kind of like, what I've heard is that it kind of can separate the taste molecules from the kind of alcohol molecules, and it can open flavours up, but it's not true for every whiskey. Yeah. You've got to try it with each whiskey and see what happens.
Yeah, so sometimes you'll add water and you'll go, oh yeah, get a lot more out of that. Other times you'll add water and you'll go, I preferred it without water. So just try it. Try it and see what you think. So especially when it's at around about 46% and above is when you can generally start doing this with water. It makes more sense, really.
Yeah. Kind of for me, I mean, I don't know if this is because it's been sitting in the glass a little bit longer, but I'm getting a lot more of that kind of caramel slice kind of thing going on for me. But
yeah, it's funny as well when people say things that can be suggestive, but now I'm like, yeah, I got it, like caramel slice, I got the caramel, I got the biscuit, I got the chocolate.
Yeah,
it's all there together. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of like pulled back this spreadiness and kind of turned up the flavour notes a little bit. And I would say out of all these whiskies, I mean, this is probably the one I'd lean to the most to add in water to because it's a high ABV kind of like whiskey. Whereas with lower ABVs, generally for me personally, I don't normally add as much water. But generally if I'm doing a cask strength or I'm doing something kind of 46% and above, I am kind of thinking, yeah, I'll add a little bit of water.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something you can do if you want to. Is there anything else from Waiheke that people should know? Or?
Come and visit us. I mean, we've got the bar open just now, so that's the Heke. It's just opposite the golf course over on Waiheke Island. We're building the new distillery there. When these stills arrive, the proper ones, they'll be going into the new distillery. We'll be running tours and things once that's all set up. So we're looking at probably about some point this year, start next year. But yeah, come see us at the Heke. We've got the bar open. We've got Waiheke Whisky behind the bar. So
really exciting.
Come and enjoy a dram.
That's great. And if you're from overseas, definitely you're now going to have to come to New Zealand as well. And also, if you want to go deeper into what this distillery is really about, watch the other video that you would have got through the QR code with this tasting where we talk to Mark, who's the master distiller. Is that what we call him?
He's the founder and owner.
Founder and owner. Right, yes. Yeah. And where we go into a lot more detail about a lot of these kind of more geeky things. So if you're interested in that, make sure you watch that video as well.
Yeah.
Great. Cool.
Thank you, Phil. And
no worries.
Hope you enjoy your new t-shirt.
Yeah. Thanks for getting a new t-shirt out of this. Yeah. Thanks. Cheers.